Hello there, everyone. My name is Teresa McCloy, and you're listening to the Real Life Process Podcast. We are so glad to be back here with you today. This podcast, if you're listening to it for the first time, we have conversations around living out our best real life through the lens of how God has wired us and designed us in our best real self. We also certify others to do the work that we do through a wonderful network and community of people that are out serving in the world using the real life process. So whether you're a coach, a speaker, a trainer, a leader inside of an organization, or you're just listening for your own personal growth, we're just glad you're here. And today on this episode, I'm actually going to be focusing on the business side of things. So this particular episode is around a question that I get asked quite a bit, and it's actually about podcasting. I was just with a network of Christian coaches, and I was sharing with them, and they were asking me, how do you start a podcast? I've actually been doing this particular podcast since 2019, and I'm proud to say we've never missed a week, and I think we've only played an episode once, maybe twice during the holiday season. So always new content, always growing and learning. And one of the best ways that I've learned even my voice in the world is through being a podcaster. But I thought we'd just take a few minutes here today for those of you that are interested in the world of podcasting. And I'll just give you some of my experience and some of what I know as to how to use this tool, this way to create content in the work that you are doing. So first, I want to say and ask the question, why are you interested in podcasting? How does it speak to you? If you are in the area of work that you need to create content, then how does podcasting fall into that framework, into the way that you put content and information and develop a voice? How do you put that out into the world? So maybe you love to speak and you've always loved to speak, and verbal communication, just like me, is a way that you like to connect with those, to teach and to train. Maybe that's part of the values or even a need that you have. That's one of the tools that we work with here at the process, is a needs and values assessment. And so if those things show up for you, accomplishment and impact and catalyst and teaching and training, if those are part of your wiring, then podcasting might be something that you might want to consider. But the very first thing that you want to think about is, why do you want to hang out in the podcast world? I know for me, I love to speak, but one of the things I learned as I was considering a podcast is to first go be a guest on others' podcasts. That was some of the best advice that I ever received. And that was actually from someone who promotes people onto other podcasts. And what he said to me was, before you dive in to the back end and to the systems and processes of doing a podcast yourself, why don't you go be a guest on other podcasts? So that is still my best advice. If you're looking to start a podcast, I'd spend 3 to 6 months actually being a guest. So if you're passionate about a certain topic, you want to do training and knowledge and information and content around a certain topic, go research other podcasts that talk around that topic, or that their audience would relate to yours, or you enjoy listening to. Doesn't matter how large the podcast is, because if they're your ideal audience, they're a great podcast to be on. So I encourage you to go be a guest first on some other podcasts. I learned so much back in 2018 when I was a guest on several podcasts. I was probably recording 1 to 2 podcast guest spots a month for anywhere, probably almost a year I was doing that. And every one of them was a little bit unique and different. They were different in the length of the podcast, the way that the host set up the podcast. Some of them had a very scripted question format that they followed. How did they send me information to let me know how to prepare to be on the podcast? How did they follow up with me when my episode released? I learned so much about what I wanted to do in a system and a process from being a guest on a podcast. So if podcasting is on your heart, the first thing I would say is go be a guest. Then start to take all that information and think about your own podcast. Did you enjoy talking about the things that you talked about as a guest? Were there key things that just really resonated and you were passionate about? And they go along with how you want to show up in the world as a coach, as a speaker, as a trainer, as a leader within the organization, or just some specific niche that you're passionate about in the health space or in the parenting space or the marriage space, or one of multitudes of things that you could talk about on a podcast. One of the statistics that I learned as I was researching to share with this group of Christian coaches that I was sharing with was that there are so many podcasts out there. Actually, the statistics say that there are over 2 million podcasts out right now as of April 2023. That is a lot of podcasts. But here's the thing, there's over 6 million blogs. So when you think of it that way, it's like, maybe there's room for me in the podcasting world. And I can guarantee you that there is. Here's another reason why. Most podcasts fail within the first 30 days. And the reason they fail is because they stop recording episodes. It's not because no one was listening. It's because they stopped recording. I often say about podcasting that if someone gave you the opportunity to stand up in front of a room of people, anywhere from 25 to 100 people every single week, and speak to them and talk to them, would you do it? Well, that's exactly what podcasting is. You get to deliver content, develop a know, like, and trust relationship with an audience out in the whole entire world. And there could be only 50 to 100 people listening each week. But if they're your ideal people that you want to connect with, especially if you're inviting them to work with you further, especially if you have other things that you would like to offer them and serve them with in content or coaching or speaking or training, then getting in front of that ideal audience might be exactly why you want to use podcasting. You don't have to have hundreds of thousands of downloads every week or every month or every year to have a great, effective podcast. And I just want you to hear that. Most fail because they quit recording, not because the podcast itself has failed. The other question I get a lot is, how expensive is it to podcast? Well, you can go super high end or you can do it on a shoestring. And I actually started on a shoestring. I did all of my own recording and my own editing and my show notes. I did everything myself. And you can do it that way. It's very simple. The only thing you really have to pay for is an inexpensive service that hosts your podcast and sends it out to all the podcast players, such as something like Libsyn or Podbean or Buzzsprout. All of those are there's lots of others that host your podcast. You put your audio on that service and it sends it out to things like Spotify and Apple Podcast and Google Podcasts and Alexa, all the places, Amazon, all the places that you choose for it to be heard. Plus, you can upload it to your own website and have it there, and it's evergreen content. That means it never goes away. People can search you and find you out on the internet through a Google search or whatever web search they're using, and find your recordings. So you're available to listen to and to build relationship with. So it's very inexpensive. You need a good microphone and you need a way to record. There's free software out there to do that with, such as Audacity. You can use Apple Recording, Apple Music Recording. There's all kinds of different things. And then as you've done your podcast consistently for a while and you've started to build up an audience, you may want to outsource some of those things. You could start with outsourcing one thing at a time until all you're really doing as the podcaster possibly is doing the audio recording. You're not doing anything else in that system. You could outsource it to people on your own team, or you could outsource it totally outside of your organization in your team. Totally up to you. I would also say the other question I get is, how long will it take me? Well, in the beginning, I would allow, 30 to 60 days to get the podcast set up, to get everything going, to get the graphics made for your artwork. Again, you can do that inside of something like Canva, but allow yourself 30, 60, 90 days. Here at the Real Life Process, we call that a project. Set up your project and the actionable steps you need to do, the actionable things that you need to do to get the podcast up and going, and all the little bit of research you need to do, get it registered on Apple, all of those types of things. Decide on the name of your podcast, and then you'll get into a workflow. Now, I recommend in the workflow of starting a podcast that you choose the day and the time that you're going to record on a regular basis, especially if at some point you want to offload your podcast to your team or to outsource it, and you'll have a schedule you need to follow. I always want to be a couple of episodes ahead, if at all possible, and maybe even more than that. So you could batch record, and maybe once a month you record 3 episodes in a morning or an afternoon, and you're ready to go for the entire month. You also can do a seasonal podcast, meaning you do 8 to 12 episodes, and then you take a break, and there are no more podcasts that are uploaded in that season, almost like reading a book or having chapters to a book. And that's another way to podcast. It's not so much about how often, although majority of podcasts are weekly, but it's about consistency. So if you say, I'd love to have a podcast, this is the way I want to bring my voice into the world, and I want to do it the first week of every month, perfectly fine. Your audience, as they find you, will start to know that that's how often that you podcast. And you want to get them to subscribe so that it automatically downloads and they get a new episode on a consistent basis. So those are different ways that you can kind of lean into that rhythm and routine, as we like to say here, and lean into creating it on a regular basis. Let me share with you a few other tips. You want to choose that theme or topic and think about, what you're passionate about and what you would like to talk about for quite some time. Now, that doesn't mean you can't shift. I actually started my podcast by talking about the tool of the Enneagram. It's a personality tool that I absolutely love. And I talked about that particular topic both solo and in person. But about a year and a half into talking about that topic, I actually switched over to talking more about the framework that I use for coaching, the process that I have here at the Real Life Process. And as we started certifying others to use that framework, the podcast became more of a business podcast, a coaching podcast, and grew in a different direction. And that is perfectly fine. So just because you start out one way doesn't mean your theme or topic. Just pick one and start sharing if podcasting is the direction that you want to go. Remember, in the very beginning of your podcast, you're not going to have a lot of listeners. So you're growing that small audience over time, and you will be pleasantly surprised after 3 to 4 years of podcasting, the following that you have and the way people that are connecting with you. So there's different types of podcast, interview styles, storytelling, solo episodes, but choose a format that suits and fits your personality, along with that rhythm, behavior, and routine that you want to develop. Also, get the right equipment. You don't have to invest in super high quality in the beginning, but you want a good microphone. Audio-Technica has a pretty low-end $100, $130 mic, corded microphone that's a great podcasting mic to start with. And as I said, either some editing software, if you're going to use it yourself, such as Apple or Audacity or Camtasia or other things that you can use to edit for yourself or hire that done. So, a pair of good headphones, a microphone, a quiet location. Strangely enough, I think there was just a beep that happened in my background as I said, quiet location. So there you go. You never know what's going to happen in the background of your podcast. But I will say this too, you don't have to worry about it being perfect. People are wanting to engage with you in your real life and in your real story. That is some of the reasons, depending on your style, that they might love your podcast. So plan your episodes out in advance. Think about, what you want the next 2 or 3 to be, especially if you're going to have guests on and you want to talk to those guests about certain things, then you'll want to schedule them out and have a little bit of a plan for those. So what I would suggest, if you're leaning in to developing out a podcast, is that you use a tool that we use here at the Real Life Process called a mind map. And put a circle in the center of a piece of paper and draw a bunch of other circles around them and just brain dump all the things that you would need to do to start your podcast. And then put down the 10 or 15 things and then decide which one comes first, which one comes second. Now you have an actionable plan for the next 30 to 90 days to get your podcast set up and ready to go. You can use that same tool, that same mind map, to decide on a theme. Put the theme. What do I want the theme to be? What are all the things that I love to talk about, that I'm passionate about, that I want to do interviews around? Or you can use that same tool to flesh out some of your episodes and how they would flow. So take a mind map, create some actionable steps, but take some action. We just want to encourage you to don't keep the knowledge, information, and passion that you have under a bushel. Let it flow. Let it come out of you. And if podcasting and speaking is the way that you think that would be the best for you, I definitely want to encourage you to give it a try and see what you think in creating content and putting your voice out into the world in this way. So take some action, do a mind map, and dive into the podcasting world. I just want to thank you for listening to this episode as we explored one of my favorite tools in showing up in the world, and that is podcasting. If you start a podcast, be sure to let me know. I might love to be a guest on your podcast. Just reach out to Teresa at thereallifeprocess.com and invite me to come on and be a guest if you start. I would love to support you in that way. If you have other questions or would like to connect with me in any way that I can support you as a coach, as a speaker, as someone that's working inside of an organization, teaching and training, please let me know. I would love to have a conversation with you. Check out our website at thereallifeprocess.com and see about ways that we can serve you in the work that you're doing, or connect with you in helping you to build out your real self, your real life, and your real work, which is what we call the Real Life Process. Have a great day, everyone. And remember that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. We'll join you next week here at the Real Life Process podcast. Have a great week, everyone.